From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
It is an honor to introduce this evening's reader, Sandra Beasley. Sandra is the author of 3 poetry collections, most recently Count the Waves, along with I Was the Jukebox, winner of the Barnard Women Poets Prize, and Theories of Falling, winner of the New Issues Poetry Prize. Honors for her work include a 2015 NEA Literature Fellowship, the Center for Book Arts Chapbook Prize, and 2 DCCAH Artist Fellowships. She lives right here in Washington, D.C., and is on the faculty of the Low Residency MFA program at the University of Tampa. I want to talk just a bit about Sandra Beasley's most recent collection, Count the Waves. In it, poems create and examine correspondence over distances, how the weariness of travel can code and twist and pull at our relationships. It's like participating in a game of telephone, but often lonelier. The end of the receiving line never gets to meet the original voice, or the connection is lost, or the preceding participants have all simply left, leaving reliability up for question. This is when Beasley's poems wildly and inventively reimagine and retell history. They look around and take inventory of what deserves consideration and what doesn't. She uses humor in tandem with vulnerability to play out the ways in which intimacy can be both elevated and flattened. As in, when I say I wish to correspond with you, what I mean is I want to bite your tongue across these many miles. Lines like this startle us, make us laugh, and ultimately reshape our sense of the truth. Please join me in welcoming Sandra Beasley.
Good early evening. At the end of the festivities last night, there was a reception at the Library of Congress. We got back home, and my husband said, "It's really fun to see you in your element." And I said, "What does that mean?" And he said, "You know, you went woo a lot." And I did. This is an occasion for going woo. We're celebrating such a great time for literature in this country. We're celebrating the leadership of Carla Hayden. We're celebrating a whole bunch of people being in the house today and just giving fantastic presentations. And I personally am celebrating the gratitude I have for those in the room right this moment. I see friends, I see students, I see fellow writers, and in particular this opportunity that was given to me by the Library of Congress and the NEA, so Amy, Amy's incredible staff, Rob, Karen, my handler for the day, who made sure no one stole my purse, the staff at today's signing, and great people in the house, and my husband, Champness, who's hiding out there. All right. I really appreciated that introduction to Count the Waves, and so I'm going to jump right into reading from this series, and then we'll actually hear a few new poems, and then we'll open it up for questions. I went through a period of my life of about 5 years when I was traveling relentlessly. I put about 50,000 plus miles on my car. And so in some ways, Count the Waves is about the way that intimacy is both lost and in some ways gained over long distances. We allow ourselves to say things that perhaps we would not otherwise. And when I was going through that period of my life, many people mentioned that the practical thing would be for me to move my things into a storage unit, accept this nomadic time, and I couldn't do it. I could not give up the foot that was keeping me in Washington, D.C. So when I read this opening poem from the collection, which is called Inner Flamingo, I want you to understand that while birds are often appearing in metaphors in my work, These are literal flamingos. These are National Zoo flamingos. These are me getting home maybe once a month, twice a month, and the first thing I did on a pretty day was walking down to the National Zoo, taking in the open-air aviary, having quality peacock time, checking on those teenager cheetahs, right? And looking at those flamingos and thinking, what love can I find that anchors me here the way I want to be anchored? And I did. Inner flamingo. At night, my body discovers her secret geometries. Inner flamingo knee hitch, inner flamenco arm arch, Hermes diagonal of flight across the mattress. The sleeping body is selfish. The sleeping body cannot lie. Once there was a man from whom I always woke huddled at the bed's edge. Then there was a man who laid his lust as a door knocker at the small of my back. The first time I laid down with you, sweat stuck, each onioned in the skin of the other, I assumed the unconscious hours would peel us free. Yet, when sun cracked its eye over the horizon, we were as we'd been, and the pink of me cocked her head, listening. As you might imagine, in a collection that chooses to start out with a poem of lasting love, if I tell you that I traveled relentlessly for 5 years and 50,000 miles, you might guess that there was some non-lasting love prior to that. And so I'm going to read a trio of poems that describe that through line that you can locate in this book. Fidelity 2. In some versions, his pericardium was pierced, the body bleeding water. Some say only the usual red. In one story, a full moon, in another, hours of eclipse. Where Gospels agree is at the door of the cave when a boulder rolls back and some woman, one Mary or another, names that first essential absence. It is April, and he raises his fears every 3 days. He brings home a bouquet of muscular lilies. He waits for the miracle. She calls her name into a cave, and the cave answers with her name. In the conversation in the signing line earlier, a young gentleman was kind enough to come up and ask how a poem worked, something about my process. And I talked about oysters and how, if you know anything about the actual anatomy of real oysters, this little bit of irritant grit gets into the creature. And for me, that might be an image or a phrase or a question. And what an actual oyster will do is it'll try to protect itself from it. So it coats itself, coats that grit in juice and coats it again, each layer hardening, each time realizing, I still have not gotten that thing out of my body, coating it again, until the pearl is formed. And what I was trying to communicate is that a lot of times, by the time I sit down to draft the poem, I've been working on the poem for days. And if I'm lucky, it looks something like one of those perfect pearls, but usually it's like a freshwater pearl, kind of murky and mishappen, and But that metaphor of the oyster, that one stays with me. Parable. Worries come to a man and a woman, small ones, light in the hand. The man decides to swallow his worries, hiding them deep within himself. The woman throws hers as far as she can from the porch. They touch each other, relieved. They make coffee and make plans for the seaside in May. All the while, the worries of the man take his insides as their oyster, coating themselves in juice, first gastric, then nacreous, growing layer upon layer. And in the fields beyond the wash line, the worries of the woman take root, stretching tendrils through the rich soil. The parable tells us, consider the ravens, but the ravens caw useless from the gutters of this house. The parable tells us, consider the lilies, but they shiver in the side yard, silent. What the parable does not tell you is that this woman collects porcelain cats. Some big, some small, some gilded, some plain. One cat stops doors, another cups cream, another sugar. This man knows they are tacky. Still, when the one that had belonged to her great aunt fell and broke, he held her as she wept, held her even after her breath had lengthened to sleep. The parable does not care about such things. Worry has come to the house of a man and a woman. Their garden yields greens gone, bitter corn cowering in its husk. He asks himself, what will we eat? They sit at the table and open the mail, a bill, a bill, a bill, an invitation. She turns a salt shaker cat between her palms and asks, but what will we wear? He rubs her wrist with his thumb. He wonders how to offer the string of pearls now writhing in his belly. Fidelity 1. She did not mean to keep the whisk when she packed the kitchen of the apartment they once lived in. Night after night, he'd tried to emulsify soy sauce and peanut butter with a fork before dumping the tan-brown mess on lettuce and chicken breasts boiled to lumps, good fat bubbling off to pool in the hollow of the burner. The whisk was an honest gift, curlicued in white ridged ribbon from a woman who trusted overpriced solutions to a man who thought anything could blend if he worked his hand hard enough. So, in addition to that narrative, there's another sequence that threads through Count the Waves, and I wanted to read poems from it because I think that this was the work that the National Endowment for the Arts was kind enough to reward, to recognize with a fellowship, which really quite literally shored up my life. It came at a moment when I needed the support, I needed the encouragement, and I continued on this strange path of trying to make a living as a writer. In 1853, now this is real, a writer named A.C. Baldwin published a compendium of phrases, and he referenced them by number. It was this code for conversations over long distances. He called this collection, the Traveler's Vade Mecum, or instantaneous letter writer by mail or telegraph for the convenience of persons traveling on business or for pleasure, and for others, whereby a vast amount of time, labor, and trouble is saved. So, in a collection that was already destined to be about long distances, I combed through this manuscript, in part inspired by an outside solicitation. There will be a whole anthology of Traveler's Vade Mecum poems out later this fall. And I picked the ones that resonated for me. And so you'll hear for each title an actual line from the 1853 Traveler's Vade Mecum. And then under that, thinking about this idea of space. of intimacy lost and gained. The Traveler's Vade Mecum, line 7671. It is no secret here. Dirt, wrote a British anthropologist, is matter out of place. Drop a grape from bowl to table and we call it dirty. Drop a grape to the floor and it is trash. Bowl, table, these are ordering agents, ways to tell the functional from fallen. Skin, tendon, these are ordering agents. You want to kiss my mouth, but not the teeth inside my mouth. You want to hold my hand, but not the blood within that hand. There is a truth in you, but it won't be the dirty truth until it tumbles into the air between us. In this city, there is always a long walk home at 7 a.m. light, high heels stabbing the subway grates. A walk home past gutters littered with the non sequitur of chicken bones, wings that once held a dream of flight. Anybody ever had a person in your life, and this happens to be about a he, but it's not gendered, who just consumed, like kind of locust-like, whether it be emotionally or in terms of a cupboard, or just kind of never quite kept track about the available resources and just assumed that something would always come up to fill the pot? If you've ever encountered someone like this on your travels, you usually end up writing a poem about him. The Traveler's Vade Mecum, line 1181. The calamity is not serious. He catches the rain in his cooking pot. There's nothing to put in his cooking pot. He places a stone in the cooking pot. He dances by the fire as the water boils. Stone soup, he sings. Lend a little garnish, he tells our village. Soon you'll each have a bowl. In go the carrot tops, the rosemary. In goes the ham bone with larded lips. The children gather, the strays mule. Sometimes it has to be button soup, sometimes axe soup, sometimes nail. In France, he is a soldier. In Portugal, he is a monk stirring sopa de pedra. Wherever he goes, he is the clever man. Folktale 1548 in the Arne Thompson Index. Not to be confused with his brothers, Eulenspiegel, 1635, Master Thief, 1525, or 1574, The Flattering Foreman. He'll never have a turn as the stupid man, the man looking for a wife, or the man who kills/injures ogre. His is not the cat as helper, 454b. He will never have the lucky accident. He wakes each day with an empty pot and the spoon his grandmother gave him. Stone soup, he sings. The heel on his left boot loosens, so he dances harder. Our village is his pantry. His is the recipe that needs no knife. I'll just read one more from this series. So I had to really think through the reality of 1853, because some phrases you might take on one surface level meaning for the contemporary day, only to think it through and realize people were approaching these words differently. In The Traveler's Vade Mecum, line 4234 declares, "Flour is firm," which is thinking in terms of stocks of commodities. But I thought, flour? And I returned myself to thinking about what was being eaten in those days. what was being carried by those perhaps readying for service on the battlefield. Flour is firm. Baking 2 parts flour to 1 part water could stop a bullet. So good soldiers carried their hardtack over their hearts. Break it down with a rifle butt, flood it, fry it in pig fat to make hellfire stew, gnaw it raw and praise the juice. Does wheat prepare for this as it grows, seeking the light in a half-thawed field? Do stalks know their strength is merely in their number? What is ground down we name flour, in promise that it will be made useful. Otherwise, it's just dust. Sheet, iron, crackers, teeth, dullars, would you call it starving if a man dies with hardtack still tucked in his vest? Can you call it food if the bullet comes only at the moment he gives in and swallows? I thought I wanted to read some new poems. I might never get to read at the National Book Festival again. I should go ahead and break it out. And I know that as well as this being a day for readers, it's a day for writers, and I'm just not talking about the people on stage. I know there's a lot of people in this room right now who are drafting, who are working, who are revising, and you're up here with me. How many people here actually live in the DC area? Sweet. That's going to be my official tweet from my presentation. Sweet, says Sandra Beasley. I'm going to read a sestina. You don't have to know that form. I mention it so that if you hear a repetition of words, it's not your imagination. The acrobatics of a sestina are that you commit to a set of 6 N-words, and then you have to use them in a particular pattern. And this is a DC sestina. It's called American Rome. The dedication line recognizes Marion Shepilov Barry, Jr., 1936 to 2014. Marion Barry, Jams of Washington State. I thought they were mocking our city. Take a mayor and boil his sugar down, spoon spreadable, sweet. We take presidents and run them in a game's 4th inning stretch. We take bullets and turn them to sea dogs. Do you remember that ballot? Sea dogs, dragons, stallions, express. The Washington Wizards was no more or less of a stretch. We wave gavels like wands in this city. We're the small town in which a president can plant some roses. Each time I sit down to try and say goodbye, all I write down is, "Dear City." My neighbor walks his dogs past a monument to a president's terrier, forever bronzed. Washington has no J Street, no Z, yet the city maps attend to 50 states and a stretch of 5 blocks northeast Metro track, a stretch named Puerto Rico Avenue. Bow down to the unmapped names. Chocolate City, simple. Ben Ali served up chili dogs through a riot, and Walter Washington was the first and last time a president picked our mayor. The truth is, presidents come and go, 4 or 8 years at a stretch. Barry said, "I'm yours for life, Washington." Emperor Marion, who could get down with Chuck Brown. Later, reporters will dog his bitch set me up, his graft. Dear city, will you let me claim you as my city? To love you is to defy precedent. Your quadrants hustle like a pack of dogs around the hydrant capital. They stretch and paw, they yap and will not settle down. Traffic, the berry to this Washington's jam. For city miles, Barry's motorcade stretched. We laid him among vice presidents down where dogs play by the banks of Washington. I want to thank the folks, thanks. I just want to acknowledge and thank the fact that we have translators and cued speech professionals up here. I imagine that to do that on the fly is difficult for anyone, but poets are crazy. You never know what word's going to come out of our mouth. So I really appreciate the initiative to make this event inclusive for everyone and your work. Sestinas I can give myself over to a sestina and kind of make it work. Sonnets very rarely happen for me unless I literally happen to notice that the poem is already taking the form of a sonnet. I promised that I would read the poem that I just wrote, which is a sonnet that, well, I didn't know it was a sonnet. It was something I had started to draft 2 days ago and wrote yesterday. It was inspired by childhood memories of buying what at the time seemed like really fun toys, and in hindsight were kind of peculiar creatures held captive. I'm referring to what you sometimes see labeled Mexican jumping beans. North of the border, we're labeled Papa Pedro's jumping beans, past the magnets next to the fat fried snacks in plastic boxes of red, white, or green, each bean $1.99 plus tax. We jump against light and jump against heat, inner larva wrenching toward cooler places, thinking we're on a Sinaloa peak, still in the Sebastiana's embraces. Our cocooned eyes know nothing of this land. We are no one's toy. We ready to fly. Perhaps these are the pods Jack took in hand so his beanstalk could breach the gold coin sky. A child can dream, but child, you are lying. We're bought and sold for our style of dying. I'm going to finish with a couple of poems. One is from an anthology that is called Still Life with Poem. I think a lot of people don't realize the editors who put their time and their effort, nobody's getting paid with these. We do these for the love of coming together in collaboration. I think the economy of poetry is a gift economy. This is a beautiful collection of poems that were written to, in response to or to create still lives on the page. I live with a painter, so I often think of still lives or figurative landscapes exactly of the kind that he assures me are not present in his work. You'll notice with the title, I'm claiming that, well, title's Still Life with Sex. Truth is, almost all still lives have sex in them. Anytime you see fruit, anytime you see a fly, all the Flemish masters, they're all talking about death. Still Life with Sex, July 2015. But first, a skull grinning amongst the grapes. But first, hydrangea moons barely risen, cratering. But first, milky bowls congregating in the sink. But first, sticky spoons congregating in the bowls. But first, that vegetal smell. But first, that clank of pipes filling with air again. But first, dirt spilling on your side of the couch. But first, dirt spilling from your Monday shoes. But first, a canteen of water. But first, 5 loggers. But first, Magnum PI is on. But first, Tom Selleck is on. But first, kiss me, because you clutter the pewter. But first, kiss me because you track in the necessary dirt. You see a violin and add prosciutto. The cat's back is bleeding again. We are trying to make a space and hold it open. The skull, grinning amongst grapes, grins at us. Those globes of hydrangea were once bright as June. Yay for new work, even though it scares the bejesus out of me to read it in front of you all. I'll just finish with a poem from Count the Waves. One of my favorite things about poetry is the conversation it creates, often with people who sometimes the first thing they say is, I'm not really sure I love poetry, but I've had conversations about capybaras, conversations about the obscure language of Tlingit, and thanks to this poem, a lot of conversations about ukuleles. Ukulele. The vessel is simple, a rowboat among yachts. No one hides a Tommy gun in its case. No blues man runs over his uke in a whiskey rage. The last of the Hawaiian queens translated the name gift that came here, while Portuguese historians translate jumping flea, the way a player's fingers pick and fly. If you have a cigar box, it'll do. If you have fishing line, it'll sing. If there is to be one instrument of love, not love vanished or imagined, but love, it's this one. Fit a melody in the crook of your arm and strum. Thank you. So I was asked to leave a few moments for questions, if anybody wants to inquire. We have 2 microphones that you can queue up to. And if nobody has any questions, I'll just read a couple more poems, so. I know, usually poetry both begins and ends with a strange moment of questioning, often when you get a moment like, so what do you write poems about? And I always find myself wanting to say ukuleles and prosciutto and skulls. Hello.
Hello. You mentioned living with a painter. I'm wondering, I write and my father painted, and I've always felt like there's a relationship between poetry and painting, so I'm curious how that manifests itself in your house.
Well, and my mother is also a visual artist, so I truly grew up surrounded by the modes and the active work process. My husband and I can go to an art museum and walk through a gallery, and we can love the exact same 6 paintings, and we can love them for totally different reasons, right? I find myself reaching for narrative, and he is able to sometimes recognize what to me is a very subtle level of craft. And similarly, when he's commenting on a poem or literature, it's probably more easy for him to respond to the theme or the subject, whereas I might be saying, goodness, that's a sestina, right? So I think that they're dovetailing disciplines that allow us to each enrich and illuminate the other's process. People sometimes ask if we collaborate. We collaborate on cooking. We do that really well. I stay out of his studio. But one thing that I will just finish by saying is I love being around artists because they're messy. So even when I'm complaining about it, I kind of admire it. When you go to an art colony, you can always tell the artists who've put in a firm day's work because they're just dirty. Writers I've been known to wear my skirts and my nice shoes, and I admire that giving oneself over to the process. Yeah. Hello.
Hey, I know you.
You do.
I was wondering what sparks your poetry usually, if there's a pattern with that, if it comes about with a feeling, or if it comes about with an image that you see, or with something that you see
Yeah.
in a literary work.
Yeah. I absolutely, it changes. I go through different periods. So, for example, when I found the Traveler's Vade Mecum, that allowed me to really sink in and kind of work through a project where I was thinking about this particular time and these spaces, this mode of traveling. In I Was the Jukebox, I have a whole series of poems that are speaks poems. I wanted to inhabit bodies outside my own. And usually my access point for getting the poem started was to really research the anatomy of a platypus or a capybara or the nature of orchids, which are really curious. And then that would give me the grist I needed to step into that life. So I get attached. I never thought of myself as a project person, and I absolutely am. I'm noticing some folks slipping in, and I always, as a matter of good form, want to make sure they hear a poem when they show up to a poetry reading. So I'll just read one other poem that speaks to that question, because it's the series that I'm working through now, which, among other things, I'm situating the speaker at memorials and monuments. And I'm having the speaker speak to their understanding of those people. Siri wants in on the poetry reading. I'm having people speak to the larger context of knowledge that we have. Seriously, Siri, like it spontaneously started up. I've been using it as my clock. So the idea is, what would a DC person or someone really couched in American history, in the ambiguities and the complexities that surround these figures who inspire memorials, what would they think? And I'm working on a whole series of poems this way. So this one is titled Jefferson, Midnight. One of my favorite things about the memorials is that you can go at any time of day. So you can go at midnight. And for some years now, I've been finding ways to do that. Jefferson, Midnight. In another version of this story, he is a naturalist who dabbled in politics. He reinvented the plow. He joined the American Philosophical Society's Bone Committee, and while trying to prove the great Western lion, gave us our first giant sloth. He shipped a rotting moose to France to demonstrate the greatness of our mammals. He is a father of paleontology who didn't believe extinction was part of God's plan. He asked Lewis and Clark, should they encounter the mammoth, to capture one for him. For months, his seawall has been sinking, the Potomac's mudflats sucking at the support timbers. In 1918, and then for 6 months after, the tidal basin was chlorinated, so this bank could become a beach. Whites only. Those drawn to rising heat heavily populate the ceiling of Jefferson's memorial. Once the sun sets, the temperature drops, they lose their grip and fall. Bodies bounce off my shoulders, bodies land in my hair. Guards call this the spider rain. Thank you. I no longer have track of the time because Siri does not. Oh, 5 minutes left. And thank you to the woman keeping us all on time. Are there any other questions? Anybody? Yes.
What do you read in your...
I'll repeat the question. What do I read in my spare time? So you might have sensed from some of the poems I have read, I also work in nonfiction. And in fact, right now, I'm working on a collection of creative nonfiction. So I don't know if I would characterize it as spare time, but the other part of my attention is to seek out memoirs, to seek out kind of experimental or lyrical essay collections. I love reading nonfiction. I love reading about the science and the texture of the world around us, right? And so that's it. And plus, sometimes when people act as if arts and STEM, so to speak, have to be on opposite sides, I try to remind them, I went to a high school for science and technology. Like, they trusted me with a key to a helium neon laser at some point. So, I think that anything that feeds that part of my intellect, I'm thrilled to kind of nourish it. Yeah. There's we have 2 more questions, and I think I'll be able to get to them both. Yeah. Do I still have my extreme food allergies? So both in my first collection, Theories of Falling, and in a memoir I published called Don't Kill the Birthday Girl, Tales from an Allergic Life, I deal with the fact that I have an incredible and aggressive and severe range of allergies, including milk, eggs, beef, shrimp, cucumbers, cashews, macadamia. Yeah, they're all at work. I still write about food allergies. It's an important part when I see the opportunity to advocate for more sensitivity and more awareness. I do. The question is, could I outgrow them? The odds of me outgrowing them at this point in my life, there are several critical moments where bodies change, and we associate that with changes in allergies. It can happen during pregnancy. It can happen as a normal growth phase at 5, at 13, at 20. I'm past all of those, so I'm okay with that. I think that having the allergies that I do has had costs, but it's also made me an incredibly aware presence in the world. And for all I know, I wouldn't be the poet that I am if I didn't have it. So, you take the whole package. And the whole package includes the EpiPen that I've got in my purse at all times. We had one more question?
Yeah, who are some of your favorite poets and influences, poets and writers?
Yeah, so I'm hesitating because what I try to be honest about is that there was a time when, if you asked me that, I felt like I had to answer people who were just canonically appreciated. And I'll tell you the 5 poets who really made me love to write when I was younger. And that would be Langston Hughes, Gwendolyn Brooks, E.E. Cummings, Sylvia Plath, Sandra Cisneros. Yeah. And they are great authors who I continue to, if you love an author and you're in the opportunity to mentor or to teach their work. Don't teach who the canon is telling you need to be teaching. Teach the people who you feel passionate about, who made you want to write. That's how we change the canon. So they were the ones I loved. Yeah. We have 2 minutes left. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah, okay, there's a request to come to the microphone if possible.
What do you want your legacy to be as a poet?
What do I want my legacy to be as a poet? I think that there is an unfortunate and false dichotomy that has been created where people feel like, oh, I'm a formal poet, or oh, I don't write with form. I don't do that. I don't know how that came about. Every poem has form. Every poem has rigor. Every poem is making decisions on the page. Otherwise, you're talking about some strange word splooge thing that I'm not probably going to be drawn into. Yeah. I don't know how he signified that word, but that's okay. What I'd like to be known as is a poet who can have a collection where a sestina and a sonnet and a free verse poem and a prose poem sit side by side, and what you're thinking about is the themes and the concerns and the poetry, and you're not thinking about which camp I align with, which conference I go to, which buddies helped me get in what place. I want to be known for the work. And that to me involves a kind of relentless, formal, because rigorous curiosity, not only about what I choose to write about, but how I shape it on the page. Thank you so much. All right. I'm honored by this time. Thank you all and have a great evening. Thanks again to the National Endowment for the Arts, Library of Congress, and all of our sponsoring groups.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.